Have you run into this problem? You run into an issue with, say, a program you're using, an application you have on your phone or on another device, or maybe a product that you've bought somewhere in your house, and you need an answer to a question, to a problem you've had, only to go to something like Google, our beloved, trusty little overlord, to search for that problem. And honestly, you don't get a lot of help. Oftentimes, what I find myself doing more and more instead is trying to sift through pages and pages of sponsored posts or advertisements or just blatant product placement instead of the answers to my question. And even when I get an answer, maybe through a dedicated forum, the people there often treat you, well, maybe like the question you're asking is a bit stupid. I've noticed more and more as time has gone on that there's this sort of elitist culture around, well, really just anything these days. The products you may have questions about, I use a program like OBS and run into issues with it on occasion where I need to answer a question, but oftentimes I just try to figure out how to deal with the problem myself or find a way around it, because I've found myself more and more, well, trying to search through forums, both official and unofficial, and honestly just being treated bad, poorly, and not respected. Here's the thing. When it comes to the internet, when it comes to the age that we live in, as time goes on, as technology changes, we find ourselves more and more understanding that we might be familiar with an environment of a program that we're using or a product that we have in our house, but we have to assume that not everybody is. And so when maybe we have an answer to somebody else's question, we should treat it as though they don't know, or maybe the product is new to them. Why is that the case? Why is that my belief? Well, first things first, if I don't know how much experience you have with something, whether it is building with Legos or fixing up some kind of electronic in your house, I should just assume the best. The best case scenario, maybe this is the first Lego set you've built or the first time you've ever taken something apart to try and repair it. Why? Well, honestly, I think for one thing, it's the safest position to be in. But what I've found more and more often, and I find this especially egregious, is that when I have a question, I'll often find myself looking on Google and sifting through the ads as mentioned before to eventually find a forum where many of the answers to said question is often just rephrasing the question and then telling you the end result without ever dictating the steps required to get there. A recent example from me is with my 3D printer. It has a setting turned on by default out of the box, and the manual says if you don't want to use it, to disable it, but it doesn't direct you as to how. Okay, no big deal. It's a pretty popular product, and the slicers that I'm using for it are fairly popular as well, so people have run into this issue. I mean, it's an out-of-the-box question, right? Now, I didn't buy the printer that I have for its high-speed capabilities, but it was nice to get it for that reason so that if I wanted to upgrade in the future, if I wanted to do things faster, I had that option. So I'm not in any rush to fix the question, to fix the problem, but I still look on occasion to see if maybe somebody else has figured it out, maybe somebody else has popped up a new answer. But what I found more and more often is that people will ask the question, they will describe their problem. And someone else, as I mentioned, will rephrase the problem that they have and then tell you, disable it. Well, thank you. I got that part from the manual. How do I disable it? They don't elaborate any further. Maybe you've run into a problem similar to this as well, and I can't tell you how frustrating it is. But it's often sort of this position, and I say elitism because sometimes it's pretty blatant that people just think they're better than you for knowing more, but sometimes it's not intentional elitism. It's just this sort of air of maybe people being tired of answering the same questions, often not understanding that maybe the forum that they're on is specifically based for that product, and there's only so many questions you can ask about something until you run out of questions. So inevitably, when a product sees a longer lifespan, all of the questions will be asked, and people will more and more likely rephrase the same question again, because they don't know any better, and that's fine. The burden should not be on the person asking the question, at least not in my opinion. Yes, they need to provide, maybe if it is a program specific or a requirement specific issue with, say, a computer or something like that, the specs. Absolutely, I get all of that. But what I don't get is when a question, in theory, has a simple answer, like toggling a setting on and off, but people's answer is oftentimes, just do it. But that's why I'm here, right? I imagine that's why you asked those questions in the first place. What I have found more and more useful, and I know I keep saying more and more twice, is YouTube. YouTube definitely has its problems, but at the very least, when people go out of their way to make a video as to how to solve the problem, oftentimes they're not there to waste your time or to troll you. It does happen on occasion, and sometimes not every video goes into every detail it should, because many videos will assume some kind of experience on, well, the viewer's part. But we shouldn't. At least not in my opinion. And I look at it like this. So I build Lego, and I wanted to use this as an example since it is relevant to me and this channel. But for example, when I see other builders out there design something that I am inspired by, I may want to know aspects of that build. Maybe not the entire thing, because oftentimes I can reverse engineer it myself. But when I ask the question, hey, can you, for example, provide me the build for this mechanism or what it is doing? If they sent me the instructions for the entire thing, am I going to be mad? No, because somewhere in there I can sift through and find the exact portion that I'm looking for. This also applies for official Lego products as well. I may not like the end result, or I may want to just use a mechanism from one build in another build. And oftentimes building that mechanism can allow you to become more familiar with it and its use cases, right? To get a better understanding than just pictures. YouTube is very good at this as well because it is a video-based, not an image-based program. However, if instead I wanted to build the whole thing, but I framed it as a question about a mechanism, and someone provided me only the instructions for the mechanism, they still answered my question, fair enough, but they didn't go above and beyond to give me the entire result. Now, here's the thing. They couldn't have known that I wanted to build the whole thing because of the way I phrased it. But it is also better to assume, and honestly, at least in the sense of instructions, it's less work on their part, but that's neither here nor there. So I use it as that example because it is something that I hope you can relate to as well. I don't find myself in this position very often. Oftentimes, many other people will get to asking the question of, how do you build this before I ever do? Or many times, if I'm following them on Instagram or elsewhere, they will provide instructions or photo instructions at the very least of their build already. So I never really seem to find myself asking those questions in the first place. I also generally enjoy reverse engineering when it comes to Bionicle, Lego, and other builds, but that doesn't mean that everybody does. So oftentimes I find myself more and more where if I want to ask a question, I do so on behalf of other viewers. And I know that this comes down to the whole, well, I understand what you meant by that, but can you explain it for everybody else who didn't get it? Again, there's a bit of an elitist feel to that as well, I think, because you're not necessarily willing to admit that maybe you missed the joke, but I'll take it, you know? Because here's the thing. As time has gone on, as the internet has grown, as technology has evolved and changed, we've found ourselves in a world where you need higher and more advanced skills. Maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it, but I'm sitting here while I'm doing research about like what computers to use if I want to do photo editing or video editing, whatever the case, for future videos down the road. And I'm realizing and understanding that honestly, it doesn't need to be perfect. People were editing videos 5-10 years ago or more, and though maybe the process has become more streamlined, I don't need the top, the best, the most expensive things to get by. And I also don't need the most knowledge of anybody out there. And I don't need to treat it as though I do, because I think we get in this sort of like comfortable position when we think we know everything about a product, about a service, about a process, where we start to treat people asking questions as though they're stupid. So I bring another example to this, resin casting. And I've talked in the past about what I call toxic creators. And this is something that I've seen a lot as well. When it comes to resin casting, especially when it comes to resin casting with Bionicle pieces, as I tend to do, I try to give out as much information as possible to share what it is I have learned. And I understand that my process is not perfect. It has its flaws, as every process probably does. But I do something that works for me and that satisfies my desire to create. And that gives me a product that looks great at the end, right? So it doesn't bother me if it has imperfections. But of course, I'm always trying to steer myself in a direction of having less of those imperfections in the future because I want to continue to improve, as we all should. I never assume that I'm already there, that I'm a master builder, a master resin caster. I always assume that there's something else to learn, that there's some new process being developed, and I'm not afraid to do the developing if it isn't being done by somebody else. But there is absolutely a segment of people out there who, well, cast, whether it is in the Lego side of the community, the Bionicle side of the community, or even just in general resin casting as a whole, casting art pieces or jewelry, etc., who will often treat it as though they have all the answers, that they do it the right way, and therefore when they see it done a different way, assume that it is wrong. Or they see a flaw in your product and assume that that is a byproduct of your wrongdoing, and not necessarily just a difference between something of theirs and something of yours. I've run into these problems before. The thing we need to learn from this, that we need to take away from this, is that not everything has a one right way. It's not a one-way lane on the road, and sometimes it's worth going back a few steps and asking, hey, is there something different I can do about this? Is there a different way that I can approach this problem? And if I can't answer it, if the answer isn't already there, maybe I push it aside for now and revisit it later. Because, well, for one thing, fresh eyes are always better, but also I think it helps to humble you a bit, you know? To sort of get this experience and get this air of not just confidence, but understanding that we're all in our own growing process. I like to say, a little motto of mine is that adults are all pretending. And I don't mean that in a naive way that like adults don't know what they're doing, but many of us kind of luck into the positions we're in or luck into the result that we may desire. Doesn't necessarily mean that we are able to recreate it, that we know every single in and out. And I understand a lot about physics, I understand a lot about chemistry, but it doesn't mean that I know how a process like this goes. I can make some educated guesses, some inferences based on what I have seen, but I'm not going to go out of my way to tell somebody else, well, you're doing it wrong. Because here's the thing. We also can't assume that the product that somebody wants up in their head is going to look exactly like how somebody else wants it. At the end of the day, we don't know what anybody else's experiences are. We don't know their story. We don't know their desire or what they want as an end result. And we don't know how they, want to approach it, nor the resources they have, the space, the time, the money, etc. There's so many variables out there that it's just not worth assuming. It's not worth assuming someone's experience in something, so it's always best to start from the safest position and assume they don't know anything. Don't treat them as naive, don't treat them as dumb because they know nothing. Don't make inferences based upon your assumption of that person. But it is beneficial, it is to the best, in my opinion, in most cases for everyone, to just assume that this person asking a question is brand new to this thing, so let me answer it in as thorough of detail as possible where it is relevant to do so. And the other reason I suggest doing this is because, well, the internet is timeless. For the most part, everything is archived, and it means that, well, when somebody else comes along that has the same question, eventually they are going to be a novice. You can't control who has questions about what. And if you go into great detail about a process, then they can pick up where you may have left off. Whereas instead, or rather, if you were to just assume this person knows everything already, or they don't know enough and don't deserve to know enough, that's just no way to live. You know, it's not fun. Here's the thing. Before I end this one, I just want to say that there's a comfort in knowing something, whether it is something that you think you are going to use or not, but at the same time, there's also a comfort in not knowing. There's a blissful ignorance, as they say. I think both are important. There's an important balance in there as well. And sometimes we want to learn something new, while other times it's just not worth the analysis. And at least not for us, because other people can be experts in their field. You don't need to try and be a jack of all trades, so to speak, because, yeah, when you want to try something new, when you want to experiment, sometimes the most fun part is not knowing. Because you can't limit your creativity if you don't know what to expect in the first place. But if you think you know the end result, but you don't know the steps it takes to get there, then when you fall short of that result, you may be discouraged. You may not want to continue forward. But if you have no expectations, how can you be discouraged when there's no reference point? I don't know. Maybe I'm phrasing that a little poorly, but at the end of the day, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It took a few recordings to try and get this one down, but of course, if you did enjoy it, the best possible thing you can do is to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. All of those are different forms of engagement that YouTube really enjoys, and it tells the algorithm you want to see more content like this, but also it's the biggest help that you can give to me, and it's free. On top of that, you can also, well, I already said subscribe, but you can subscribe again, I guess, which would be unsubscribing, so that'd be weird. Don't do that. You can also join the conversation down in the comments below, as I mentioned, or if you want to take the conversation further, you can check out Discord, Instagram, or Patreon, all of which are linked in the description, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.